lot of the burden of growth the government took on its shoulders through capacity expansion via public infrastructure. Now the government is changing the calculus, handing money to the middle class, to the taxpayer who seem to be getting irked, whose mood seemed despondent, saying, okay, here is extra cash in your hands. Let's see the multiplier this has on the Indian economy. To talk about the potential impact on growth of this union budget, we've set up a corporate brainstorm here at the CII headquarters. We're broadcasting from the Le Méridien. And I want to introduce you to my guests joining me for this special discussion. I want to start with Sanjeev Puri. He heads up ITC, is currently the president of CII, so welcome. Flanking him is Chandrajit Banerjee, who had several crucial inputs in the formulation of this budget. On behalf of India Inc., is the Director General of CII, so welcome. We have the incoming president of CII, Rajiv Mimani, heads up Ernst Young in India. Thank you, sir, for taking our time. To my left, I want to welcome Mr. Mukundan from Tata Chemicals. Then we've got the infrastructure Mim, Vinayak Chatterjee, and we've got Naresh Trehan, who's representing the pharma sector, health sector, and remember, not just during this budget, we're also hearing from Donald Trump that there could be new tariffs against the Indian pharma sector. So what impact will that have? Let me start by asking Sanjeev Puri about the potential impact on growth, because if India needs to be in Amrit Kal, become a developed country by 2047, we need to go 8% plus. The economic advisor said we're likely to grow between 6.3 to 6.8 next year. Do you see the maths in the way the finance minister has organized it having a positive impact on growth for next fiscal?
Absolutely, Rahul. I think the estimates, no doubt, for next year are realistic. But very clearly, the pillars have been identified to accelerate this growth going forward. And there are multiple levers that are being touched upon. One is really a lot of focus on areas or economic activities which have a high labor intensity. So agriculture being one, MSMEs, within MSMEs, things like toys, then we're talking of tourism, a lot of focus on exports and this whole idea to have an integrated view, cross-ministerial group, because, you know, given the global context, we need agile responses and very targeted responses, and there are already barriers coming up in global trade. So, you know, FTAs, many of these things have to be negotiated. And then there is also investments in developing the innovative capacity, human capital development is happening. And very strong focus on reform. And this is very important to unlock the potential of the economy and take the growth rates beyond what is being forecast for the year ahead. And these are things that will take it beyond 7 and to 8. Ease of doing business, cost of doing business, very clearly setting up a task force to create the vision document or the blueprint, so to say, very clearly focused on recognizing much of this has to happen at the state. So the collaboration with the states, incentivization of states, I think these are all positive steps. And, you know, we are also seeing some relief to the middle class in the form of income tax. And with the employment generation and relief on income tax over a period of time, that will also, you know, contribute to the virtuous cycle of investment and employment and so on and so forth.
A lot of the focus so far in past budgets was on public infrastructure. That was really the thrust through government capacity expansion. That's not stopped, but that's been paused at the levels where it was last year. No significant increase in allocations. The government's view now is give money to the middle class. Let's see if they spend and if that can spur demand. How do you see this work out in terms of spurring growth?
Well, actually, this is the fundamental question of this budget. For the last decade, and largely with this government, from 2014, the governing mantra has been, and accepted by all of us, that large outlays, public outlays in infrastructure spend were to pump prime the economy. And the government gave out statistics that for every 1 rupee spent on infra led to 3 rupees of GDP growth, and 1 rupee spent on direct benefit transfer kind of transfers would lead to 90 paisa of GDP growth. So for almost 10 years, we have seen this philosophy at work. If you saw the last many years, 5 lakh became 7.5, 7.5 became 10. So we've seen 30% increases in capital outlays in budget after budget, till suddenly last year we saw 10%, and finally this year we are seeing 0%, flat, right? So the question I pose before you, your viewers and this panel is, does this lead, is this a signal of a significant shift in government thinking that very large outlay increases in infrastructure will no more be used to pump prime the economy, but we will now move to a different economic doctrine where rising consumer demand, a la reduction in personal taxes, or private sector capex, or hopefully the increase of manufacturing through EODB kind of measures would now substitute this governing mantra. So the question is it going to work? Are there apprehensions? Are there issues? And does this, honestly, to come back to the original question, does this budget signify a significant shift in economic thinking that we have followed for the last 10 years? I have one or two more issues that deserve discussion, but I'll lay this for
but because the fact also is that the allocation which was made last year, for various reasons, including the general election and the long campaign, didn't get spent. And therefore, the government is saying there's no point in just increasing allocation in public infrastructure if it can't get spent. Let's allocate the same and let's spend that money first.
It's a very contentious argument. I'll tell you why. Here is a nation that is following a mantra of increased infrastructure spends, which have multiplier effects on jobs, cement, steel, vast amount of industries. And then you turn around and say, you know, guys, I have hit a roadblock on execution capacity in project development and project execution. And hence, I can't spend the money I have. Now, should an economy like and a nation like ours that's pulling ourselves by the bootstrap now face this new constraint that project development and execution capacity leads us to not even use the funds that we have? And secondly, it's a vicious cycle. You say, I have not executed, so I'm cutting outlays. Next year, you don't execute again. Are we going to get into a vicious spiral of saying, I have reached a roadblock on execution capacity, I'm going to cut outlays? It's a very serious, vicious cycle. Let me stop here.
You're calling it a serious, vicious cycle. Chandrajit Banerjee, are you seeing a significant change in government thinking? Because a lot of the economists have been asking for the government to do something to spur consumer demand. Now the government's taken the bull by the horns and said, okay, this is what we can do. We can rationalize income tax structures in a way that we leave more money in the hand of the income taxpayer. Will that have the multiplier effect that's required to push our growth from 6.5 to take it above, closer to 8?
See, consumption itself is a large chunk of our economy, and we have all been talking about much before the budget as to how do we prime consumption, and we have got much more than what one desired. That's point one, and I think it was necessary. The government also, as Vinayak mentioned, has been heavy lifting in terms of capex over the last many years. And there has also been this question as to when does private sector kick in with in terms of investments. And private sector kick in with investments, we have had many discussions on how do we move towards ease of doing business, cost of doing business, decriminalization, etc., that all have been pretty well addressed, number one. Number two, if you really look at the type of infra spend now, which is on rural focus, the 50-year interest-free loan to states, if you really look at things like how we are looking at the national monetization pipeline 2.0, that itself is a lot of money.
But they haven't explained where the money will come from, where it will be used. They just put out a figure of 10 lakh crores.
That's right. There's 10 lakh crores, and of course, much of it will come the way it will. And these are sort of indicators that there is now a huge role for the private sector to come in, which has been being mentioned. You are laying the road and the foundation for the private sector to come in, and government, mind you, has not stopped. I mean, the capex is equal to the nominal growth rate, if one can see it that way. Yes, so as you said, that when there is unspent amount, we need to take that forward and see to it we implement that.
Rajiv Mimani, Vinayak Chatterjee is talking about a fundamental shift in the government's economic priorities, which he claims comes through this budget and the way that the numbers have been organized. Do you think that's the right way to have gone, given that there's been so much talk about the need to spur demand, particularly in urban areas?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't entirely agree with what Vinayak is saying. I definitely do agree that a little bit more allocation would have, fired up the animal spirits much more. And
allocation on government capex,
on government capex.
But why should the expectation always be from all of you for the government to be spending more on capacity expansion?
I agree with you. I'm not. What I'm saying is that that's why I'm saying that I have disagreement with Vinayak. The number could have been slightly higher, but we can't fire on only one cylinder. I think, the fact that for this to grow. And actually, if your fiscal deficit has moved down and has come from 4.8%, now you're projecting 4.4%, and your capex to GDP ratio is almost being the same, and the capex is growing at the nominal GDP growth rate, doesn't mean that we are curtailing down. It means that yes, the capex spend will grow, but at the same rate at which the GDP is growing. Now we need to fire up the other cylinders. What are the other cylinders? You know, industry is saying that consumption, urban consumption is slowing down, rural consumption has picked up. Let's try and see, address urban consumption. And they have given a massive relief, which was much beyond anyone's wildest expectations. And I think it's also equitable because a lot of middle class and lower income was suffering because of inflation. So there is an aspect of economy, there is an aspect of equity in that. The third is, how do you spur manufacturing? I think, as CB also mentioned, there is investment in manufacturing that's happening. Private sector is investing, but the expectation is, as you mentioned, that they need to step in more. So if you have to step in more, first is you have to have enough economic space so that all savings are not directed towards government. So your fisc has to stay in control. The biggest thing that all industry was saying was that one is demand has to come back, so you spur the demand through consumption. The second thing is that, you know, ease of doing business has to come. There has to be greater simplicity. There has to be better cooperation between various ministries. We have to start looking at public-private partnerships again. There has to be better coordination between center and state. And you have to look at the long-term direction of where this is going. So if you look at that, the budget is also trying to push manufacturing, particularly labor-intensive manufacturing, and manufacturing that goes into new age, whether it's EVs, solar grids, other things. So trying to push that area of manufacturing, trying to push consumption, and at the same time, anything that's capex-led. So I think it's a more holistic, I don't think it's a change in stance, but definitely addressing what the industry has been saying.